a compact aerial vehicle featuring a small human-sized basket and 4 propellers with a gentle and noiseless rotation, hovered serenely in the sky, positioned high enough to shield it from inquisitive gazes. Inside sat a young man, using binoculars to scan the distant expanse. At times, he would lower the binoculars and record observations in his notebook. Thousands of armed men were breaking camp on the distant horizon. Judging by their attire and weapons, they likely hail from nomadic tribes from the Arabian desert. They will reach the city by tomorrow's midday at the latest, with the intention to plunder, ravage, and sow destruction. Most citizens will be killed. The rest will be taken as slaves, a grim reality that Gabe held little skepticism about. No historical account marked a conflict at this particular time and location, at least none that Gabe could recollect. However, such an absence didn't catch him off guard. It was a prevalent occurrence. The grand tapestry of history frequently leaves many clashes and significant occurrences concealed in obscurity. And that is precisely what led him to his current juncture, the year 6 BCE. His purpose lay in meticulously chronicling the unadulterated annals of history, where the untold truths and overlooked events could finally be recorded accurately. The city's fate had been sealed. They remained oblivious to their impending doom. A pang of sorrow welled within Gabe, acknowledging the forthcoming loss of countless unsuspecting lives. However, his role wasn't that of a savior. He hadn't embarked on this mission to play the hero. His sole purpose was recording of historical events. Carefully stowing away the binoculars and notebook, he disengaged the autopilot and assumed control of the steering wheel, steering manually as he descended toward his concealed refuge. He glanced at his wristwatch. The countdown displayed 17 hours and 13 minutes until his mission's conclusion. The prospect of witnessing the forthcoming pillaging lingered like a sore thumb, though he fervently hoped it wouldn't come to that. Undoubtedly, this aspect ranked as his least favorite facet of being a historian. Mere minutes later, he descended to solid ground, finding refuge within a tranquil cave situated several kilometers from the city. This secluded sanctuary housed his array of equipment and records. Safely stowing the drone, he retrieved a can of tuna from his backpack. Settling into an outdoor folding chair, he reflected on the undeniable excitement of his ventures into the past. Nevertheless, enduring an entire month subsisting solely on canned food proved to be an ordeal of its own. As the mission's end drew near, he couldn't stop himself from fantasizing about sinking his teeth into a succulent cheeseburger tomorrow, relishing the sensation of its juices trickling down his chin. In the midst of his culinary daydreams, his gaze collided with that of a young girl standing at the cave entrance. "Fuck!" he tried shouting out, but the pesky tuna hindered him, causing an abrupt fit of coughing that spiraled out of control. His eyes met hers, desperately trying to convey something amidst the coughing onslaught, yet each attempt merely triggered another bout of coughs. In the blink of an eye, she was kneeling beside him, a steadying hand on his shoulder, while the other rhythmically tapped his back. A few minutes elapsed before he managed to regain control of his breath. The girl spoke words foreign to his comprehension. His grasp of Hebrew was far from perfect, but deciphering ancient Hebrew was an even greater challenge. Having finally regained his breath, he couldn't be entirely certain, but thought he recognized the word angel in her speech. "God damn it," he uttered wearily, convinced that she must have observed his descent from the sky and trailed him here. This was a precarious situation. Being seen by anyone in this time period was strictly forbidden. "Go, you can't be here," Gabe said, well aware that her comprehension was doubtful. The chasm between his somewhat rudimentary modern Hebrew and her archaic version was vast. "Go!" He punctuated his words with a dismissive gesture, a universal signal she would undoubtedly grasp. She uttered some words again, most of which eluded his comprehension, but he did catch the word angel again. She believed him to be some sort of celestial being. No, I'm not an angel. I'm a historian," Gabe exclaimed in frustration, realizing the futility of his attempts to clarify. She continued to gaze at him, her large and captivating hazel eyes fixated on his form. Gradually calming his racing thoughts, he rose to his feet, gently taking hold of her elbow and guiding her out of the cave. Compliantly, she followed his lead, yet her eyes remained firmly locked onto his visage. Go! He urged, his command unheeded as she remained rooted in place, her stare unbroken. Uttering something in ancient Hebrew once more, she exhibited no sign of movement. Go! He repeated, this time with heightened intensity, his voice commanding attention. This situation was a grave breach of protocol. Being observed by the locals, especially with technology from nearly 3 millennia in the future, was strictly forbidden. Perhaps if he could manage to guide her away before she caught sight of his equipment, he might salvage the situation. Go! Gabe bellowed once more, the force behind his voice causing her to flinch. Go! He repeated, his tone carrying a touch of threat this time. She took a few hesitant steps backward. Go away! Go! The assertiveness seemed to work its magic. She vanished from his presence. He lowered himself onto the outdoor folding chair, his breaths coming in labored gasps. Taking a few swigs from a water bottle, he allowed himself a moment of reprieve. That was close, Gabe mused, fully aware that this incident wouldn't make it into his official reports. The consequences of such an exposure were far too uncertain and potentially dire. Still, he couldn't shake the notion that this scenario must have unfolded for others as well. Surely no historian had remained completely hidden. They probably just kept it quiet, a shared secret among their ranks. Besides, with the imminent arrival of the nomadic force tomorrow, the girl's fate was likely sealed, unfortunately. Her demise would ensure that nothing in history would be altered. He sighed heavily, chastising himself for such a callous thought. How could he wish harm upon an innocent girl, especially one as striking as her, with her captivating hazel eyes and perfect figure? It was possible that his prolonged isolation over the past month had taken its toll, making him susceptible to such thoughts. As he finally had a moment to relax, her image seemed to return to him vividly. He couldn't deny her beauty, yet the timing couldn't have been worse. Angel! She reappeared at the mouth of the cave. Freaking hell! He erupted, frustration lacing his voice. Go away! Gabe demanded, his tone edged with exasperation. However, her resolve remained unbroken. She continued to mutter words foreign to him. Please, just go away, Gabe implored desperately, his plea hanging in the air to no avail. He let out a heavy sigh, slumping back and covering his face with his hands. God, why are you doing this to me? He muttered under his breath. Lifting his gaze again, he discovered her kneeling mere feet away, those captivating hazel eyes fixated on him once more. The sun hovered on the brink of setting, casting a diminishing glow that filtered into the cave. Though Gabe possessed his own lamp, he hesitated to use it in her presence. The fading light added to the challenge of the situation. Resigned to the circumstances, Gabe chose to disengage, resolutely ignoring her. She persisted in attempting to communicate, yet he feigned deafness. Making his sleeping arrangements, he prepared a sleeping bag atop a modest mattress, draping a blanket over himself. With the mission's end drawing so close, he resolved to settle down for sleep as if nothing had transpired. Tomorrow, he'd be back in the comfort of his own bed, leaving this unexpected encounter behind. In the grand scheme of things, what did it matter if she had seen him? She lacked comprehension of the true nature of what she had stumbled upon, and her account would find few believers. Besides, it was unlikely she was going to survive tomorrow's raid anyway. As he prepared his sleeping bag, he felt an unexpected touch on his back. The sensation, after a month of isolation, felt surprisingly satisfying. Turning, he found himself mere inches from her face, her entrancing hazel eyes locked onto him. Evidently, if verbal communication failed, she had found another means to catch his attention. Summoning all his resolve, he managed to avert his gaze, only to sense her warm figure pressing against his back. Temptation surged, a fierce battle waged within him. One part of him rationalized that it was harmless. After all, she would likely meet her demise tomorrow. And even if she didn't, what difference would it make? She had already seen him. A month had passed since he had been in the presence of another person, let alone a striking young woman. Who would ever know? Yet the other side of Gabe's conscience echoed with the voice of his college professor, reminding him of the dire potential of even the slightest alteration to history. The uncertainties loomed large. No one comprehended the true consequences of such interference. Summoning his willpower anew, he pivoted and gently pushed her away. With that accomplished, he nestled into his sleeping bag, attempting to surrender to slumber. However, the tumultuous rush of thoughts in his mind rendered sleep impossible. After 20 minutes of immobility, his desperation forged a slim hope that when he finally turned around, she would have disappeared. Slowly and cautiously, he shifted his position, striving to minimize any noise. Upon his careful glance, he found her situated in an awkward half-sitting, half-lying position against the cave wall. Her discomfort was palpable, exacerbated by the encroaching chill. After deliberating for a moment, he made his decision. Abandoning his sleeping bag, he procured one of his blankets and cautiously approached her. Draping the blanket around her, he endeavored to offer her some semblance of comfort. Lifting her head, their faces once again found themselves mere inches apart. Though the darkness obscured the finer details of her features, the electric charge between them was undeniable, and the tension was overwhelming. The surge of emotions had become insurmountable. Their lips met, and the connection was initiated with a tender, delicate kiss that swiftly transformed into a fervent exchange. Before he comprehended it, they were both naked, caught in a passionate intensity that enveloped them completely. The other voice, the one echoing his professor's warnings, seemed silenced, at least for now. When it was over, they huddled tightly within his sleeping bag, their bodies providing warmth and solace to one another. Amid their shared proximity, she uttered something, her finger pointing to Gabe's chest. He understood that one. She was asking for his name. With a gentle smile, he affectionately patted her cheek. He hasn't slept this well in a long time. At the break of dawn, his alarm jarred him awake, startling the bewildered girl at his side. Springing to his feet, Gabe commenced the task of gathering his possessions into a bag, all while her gaze remained a puzzled witness. With just a few hours remaining before his return to the present, he couldn't afford to leave even the smallest item behind. Once he had completed the meticulous collection of his belongings, he hoisted the bag over his shoulder and stepped outside to prepare the drone. Swiftly, he deposited the bag into the drone and clambered in after it. Gabe intended to utilize the time he had left to observe the nomadic army encamped outside the city. The girl lingered at the cave entrance, her eyes fixed on Gabe. At this point, he found himself indifferent to her watchful eyes. The probability of her demise or enslavement in the immediate future negated any concern about her witnessing his presence. With a swift ascent, he launched into the air, putting considerable distance between himself and her. His binoculars allowed him to maintain a safe vantage point while tracking the movements of the army. Amid these observations, his mind wrestled with the events of the previous night, and despite his efforts to minimize their importance, a tide of unease was swirling within him. But reality remained that the army was already in motion. The city's impending pillaging was a matter of hours away. Glancing at his wristwatch, he noted that the countdown had dwindled to less than an hour. If he's lucky, he's going to be back in the present before they reach the city. And yet he couldn't stop thinking about the girl. Engrossed in his distant thoughts, he didn't realize how low his craft had descended. It wasn't until shouts from the ground pierced his daydream that he became aware. Two men adorned in light armor were gesturing and yelling at him. "Damn it!" Gabe exclaimed, his voice charged with frustration. Without hesitation, he promptly increased his altitude, leaving the men far below. "God damn it! It's all because of that foolish girl," he muttered, frustration gnawing at him. He glanced at his watch. Only 15 minutes remained. The anticipation of leaving this era behind was palpable. For an entire month, he had maintained the utmost professionalism, and yet in these final hours, he had flagrantly violated the most fundamental protocols. First the girl, now this encounter. In a mere 15 minutes, he would be far from all of it, back in the future. After a brief session of internal reproach, He redirected his focus to his binoculars, surveying the army's activities. Curiously, after mere minutes of observation, they had ceased their advance. He rubbed his eyes in disbelief and peered again. It was indeed the case. The army had come to a standstill. His gaze darted across the landscape, searching for clues to this sudden halt. Amid his observations, he identified two figures adorned in light armor engaged in conversation with another individual at the forefront of the force. Curses escaped his lips as realization struck. Those were the same two scouts who had spotted him mere minutes ago. His gaze shifted to his watch. There were a mere 7 minutes left. No, 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 Gabe muttered in desperation. What could he do? Why were they stopping now, so close to the city? They should be advancing. He cast another anxious glance at his watch, the time ticking down to 6 minutes. You have to move, he shouted, his words slipping out uncontrollably. Advance! Attack the city! Kill the girl! But his fervent cries fell on deaf ears. His voice was unheard in the distance. As the minutes dwindled away, a disheartening spectacle unfolded. The soldiers began to pivot, changing direction. What on earth are you doing? He bellowed, the urgency palpable in his voice. Turn around! Return! To Gabe's dismay, his pleas went unanswered, and the army proceeded to march away from the city. His gaze flitted back to his watch. Under a minute remained. In an act of sheer desperation, he propelled himself toward the retreating soldiers, his watch catching his attention once more. Only 10 seconds remained. The wind whipped across his face. 5 seconds. He was nearly upon them, though his purpose remained unclear. He emitted an unintelligible cry. 3. His proximity was almost tangible. A rush of confusion filled him as he drew closer, though he had no idea what his plan was. Then, in an instant, he was seized by an irresistible force and enveloped by a vortex. What have you done, Gabriel? He murmured, his voice a whisper amidst the encroaching darkness that consumed his surroundings. The black void swallowed him, pulling him nearly 3,000 years into the future. What have you done?